Hi, I'm Stacy Rush, and welcome to my presentation on the Conners Comprehensive Behavior Rating Scales Assessment. Dr. Conners saw a need for a comprehensive rating scale that was guided by clinical experience and research, one that is supported by solid psychometrics and statistical analysis, and that is useful for professionals that work with children to identify needs, disabilities, and intervention planning and monitoring. The Conners Comprehensive Behavior Rating Scales is designed to provide a complete overview of children and adolescents' concerns and disorders. It is a multi-informative assessment of children and youth across multiple settings with rating forms for parents, teachers, and youth. The Conners CBRS provides a wealth of information with the DSM 5th edition symptom scales, content scales, other clinical indicators, critical items, and impairment items. It is generated for ages 6 to 18 years old, and the self-assessment is 8 years old to 18 years old. Features of this assessment is that it can inform your ADHD diagnosis, it can identify students for potential eligibility in special education, it can monitor response to interventions and its effectiveness. It can gain clarity by using the most comprehensive behavior rating scales available. It's easy to administer, score, and interpret results. You can discover where functioning is most impaired. There's a quick screen and monitor treatment with the Conners Clinical Index edition. And you can gain a multi-rater perspectives on youth's disabilities. There are 3 different forms that can be used with this assessment. One is the teacher, the CBRS-T. The CBRS-S is the self-assessment, which is ages 8 to 18 years old, and the CBRS-P, which is the parent edition. It takes into account the home, social, and school settings. It is assessment of behaviors, emotions, academic, and social problems. It indicates violence potential, severe conduct, and self-harm. It is also linked to the DSM-5 diagnosis. It's developed for children and adolescents 6 to 18 years and available in both English and Spanish. Test forms assess social, emotional behavior, and academic problems. It can be used in initial evaluation, re-evaluation, screening to determine eligibility for research studies, and measure effectiveness of treatment. The rater of the assessment must have known the client for at least 1 month, and those taking the assessment for teachers and parents must have a minimum of a fifth grade cognitive reading level and 3rd grade for the youth self-assessment. This graph shows the T-scores for the Conners CBRS-T. This is an example of the results, and it shows the content scales and subscales. There's error bars in each of the graphs, and this represents the standard error of measurement for each scale. The T-score has a mean of 50 and a standard deviation of 10. A perfect mean score of 50 is exactly equal to the mean score of that age and gender group. Scores that fall below 60 generally indicate typical or absent concerns. Scores from 57 to 63 should be considered borderline, and a special note should be taken by the assessor of these scores, and they must decide whether or not they are typical or atypical. This is an example of the results from the scores that were just listed. As you can see, the T-score areas in the second row down, upsetting thoughts, physical symptoms, has a score of 64, which means it is elevated. More concerns than are typically reported, and common characteristics has upsetting thoughts and or ruminations, and may complain about physical symptoms or show signs of depression. And you can scroll down and look at, there's a few elevated. Separation fears is elevated. Aggressive behaviors is very elevated. It's important to know that scores above 100 are typically not they're not given. The high score given is a 90. So if you score above a 90, your highest score will still be a 90. And this is the T-score symptom results. So these are based off of the DSM. In the sample, it's the DSM-4, but there is an upgrade for the DSM-5. And so, for example, the ADHD, hyperactive impulsive type had a T-score of 66, which is an elevated score. And so that has the scores, the results, interpretation, and then at the bottom, this counts symptoms for each of the elevated disorders. So for example, the conduct disorder, the symptom count was 5, and in the DSM-4, in this case, you have to have at least 3 of the 15 symptoms. So the symptoms gathered in this assessment would meet that minimum. Scoring discrepancies. Sometimes you can have symptom counts that are high and T-scores that are low. If this happens, the symptomatic criteria may be met, but the current presentation is not atypical for the age and gender of the client. Careful consideration should be given before seeking diagnosis. If you have a symptom count that is low and a T-score that is high, the current presentation is atypical for the age and gender, but not sufficient symptoms to meet the DSM-5 criteria for the disorder. Other considerations should be made for explanation of the high T-score results. The validity scale should be considered an indicative of potentially problematic response styles. You can have overly positive results, which are also considered positive impression. You can have negative impression results and inconsistency index. The reliability of the test, the internal reliability consistency is good. The test retest reliability is good. All correlations in the reliability of the assessment are significant. Be aware of any random bias, either by the assessor or anyone involved in the assessment. Also be aware of random responses, impulsive or careless responses, and any comprehensive errors that could occur. Initially, when reading about or learning about this assessment, I was getting really confused at the content and symptom scores. I was determining them as two different things and then as the same thing. And then later I realized they were two separate T-scores generated to ensure the correct diagnosis was being made. And I think that one important thing that I learned from this is that understanding the administrator must know the client for at least 1 month, and how crucial that can be when determining results that have T-scores and symptom scores that do not match up. Also, I didn't see anything in my research about how long symptoms have been happening for. I don't know if that is something that the test determines, or if it's just based on the administrator of the assessment. So also being aware that you're going to need to know how long to give a proper DSM-5 diagnosis. And you can incorporate other diagnoses to elevated content T-scores. Also, the perception of the person that's taking the assessment. If you have a teacher or a parent that is believing their child is acting out more or less, it might not be a true picture of what is happening because they are close to the client. And these are my references, and thank you for listening to my presentation.